France may have lost its military presence in the Sahel, but has it really lost its influence? While the Alliance of Sahel States forced France troops to leave, France continues to occupy one of the world's most powerful diplomatic positions, a permanent seat on the UN Security Council. And with that seat comes something many people have never heard of: the power of the pen. Today, we are going to examine how that influence continues to shape decisions affecting the Sahel, even after France's military withdrawal. Because leaving the battlefield doesn't necessarily mean leaving the decision-making table. To understand why this matters, we first need to look at how the region arrived at this point. The Alliance of Sahel States, made up of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, has been battling jihadist insurgents for more than a decade. And during that time, these countries partnered with France, cooperated with the United States, worked alongside ECOWAS, and hosted the UN peacekeeping mission, MINUSMA. Despite these efforts, insecurity continued to worsen. According to the Global Terrorism Index in 2025, terrorism-related deaths across the Sahel rose from roughly 5,400 in 2017 to more than 25,000 in 2024. Now, that dramatic increase fueled growing frustrations across the region, and as many questioned whether the existing security strategies was delivering the results that had been promised. Eventually, the political landscape changed, and between 2020 and 2023, military governments came into power in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. In many cities, thousands of citizens celebrated the change, not because they welcomed instability, but because they believed the previous approach had failed to improve security. The new government soon took decisive steps. French troops were expelled. American military cooperation was significantly reduced. The three countries withdrew from the ECOWAS and later formalized the Alliance of Sahel States, presenting it as a new regional security framework. At first glances, it appeared that France's influence in the Sahel had come to an end, but that's only part of the story. There is another arena where influence is exercised, not through soldiers or military bases, but through diplomacy. You've probably heard the saying, "the pen is mightier than the sword." Inside the United Nations Security Council, that expression is more than a proverb. It reflects an actual working system known as the penholder system. Under this arrangement, certain Security Council members are responsible for drafting resolutions, preparing official statements, negotiating the wording of documents, and guiding discussions on specific international crises. In practical terms, the penholder often writes the first draft that everyone else negotiates. That means deciding which issues receive emphasis, which language is included, which proposals are omitted, and when discussions move forward or slow down. For more than a decade, France served as the penholder on Security Council matters relating to Mali and much of the broader Sahel agenda. This created an unusual situation. France was asked to withdraw its military forces from Mali in 2022, and in March 2023, the Malian government openly challenged France's role as penholder at the Security Council. Yet, despite these developments, France continued overseeing important Security Council files concerning the G5 Sahel Joint Forces well into 2024. In many ways, it was like leaving the battlefield while continuing to write the official reports about it. It is important, however, to make one point clear. The penholder system was not created specifically for Africa, nor was it designed solely by France. It is part of the Security Council's long-established working methods, where permanent members frequently take responsibility for drafting resolutions on particular regions or conflicts. Other countries also serve as penholders on different issues. For example, Sierra Leone and Denmark have shared responsibility for matters concerning the United Nations Office for West Africa and the Sahel. UNOWAS. However, when it comes to Mali and key Sahel security discussions, France remained one of the most influential diplomatic actors for many years. That naturally raises an important question. How was that influence being exercised, particularly after France's military presence in the region came to an end? This question became even more relevant during the recent France-Africa summit in Nairobi. Many Africans welcomed the idea of a renewed dialogue. Given France's complicated history on the continent, there was hope that the summit could represent a genuine effort to rebuild relationships based on greater respect and partnership. At the same time, the event also attracted significant criticisms. Protesters from several countries including Kenya, Burkina Faso, South Africa, Europe, and the United States gathered outside the summit to express concern about France's continuing role in African affairs. The demonstration reflected broader debate that extends well beyond the conference. If France's military footprint has largely disappeared from parts of the Sahel, why does it continue to wield considerable influence in international diplomacy concerning the region? And more importantly, what does that mean for the future of African sovereignty, regional security, and decisions making at the United Nations? Those are the questions this story seeks to explore. But to be clear, this isn't about accusing France or assigning blame. The purpose of this analysis is to examine how international institutions operate and to ask whether the current system still reflects realities on the ground in the Sahel. With that in mind, it is important to understand what happened with MINUSMA because it provides essential context for everything that followed. The United Nations Multidimensional Integrated Stabilization Mission in Mali, MINUSMA, was deployed in 2013 with the objective of helping stabilize the country after the outbreak of conflict. Over the following decades, international investments in the Sahel reached extraordinary levels. But according to the Munich Security Report in 2024, the European Union spent approximately 8 billion on security and development initiatives across the region, while the United States contributed more than 5.5 billion US dollars. Despite these investments, the security situation continued to deteriorate. According to the Global Terrorism Index in 2025, terrorism-related deaths in the Sahel increased from roughly 5,400 annually in 2017 to more than 24,000 by 2024. Today, the region accounts for over half of all terrorism-related deaths worldwide. But faced with these figures, Mali transitional authorities concluded that the existing international security framework was not delivering the desired result. Their criticism of MINUSMA was specific. Malian officials argued that while the UN mission continued publishing reports highlighting alleged human rights violations committed by state forces, armed extremist groups were steadily expanding their territorial influence and operational capacity. Whether one agrees with that assessment or not, it became a central point of disagreement between Bamako and several international partners. This is where the discussion about the Security Council's penholder becomes particularly significant. When Mali formally requested the termination of MINUSMA in 2023, its representative addressed the Security Council and criticized the draft resolution prepared by France, arguing that France, as the penholder, had adopted a position that was hostile towards the Malian government. That statement came not from activists or political commentators, but from Mali's official representative speaking before the Security Council itself. France, for its part, maintained that MINUSMA's human rights reporting was both legitimate and necessary. It is also important to recognize that several international organizations have documented serious allegations of human rights abuses committed during the conflict. Those allegations deserve careful investigation, regardless of who is responsible. However, another question naturally arises. When a government says it is fighting an existential battle against insurgent groups while simultaneously facing sustained international criticism, how does that government perceive the balance between accountability and security? From Bamako's perspective, officials argued that international security appeared disproportionately focused on state actions while extremist organizations continued expanding across large areas of the country. Whether that perception is entirely accurate remains open to debate, but it helps explain why relations between Mali and several international institutions became increasingly strained. The tension continued into November 2025, and during that month, Sierra Leone was serving simultaneously as chair of ECOWAS and president of the UN Security Council for November, convened an open briefing and peace consolidation in West Africa. The discussion focused heavily on developments in the Sahel, and representatives from Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger attended the meeting, but only as invited participants. That distinction matters. They were able to address the Council, but they could not vote, draft resolutions, nor determine the agenda. Decisions affecting their countries continue to be shaped primarily by the Security Council members. And during the meeting, France reaffirmed its commitment to supporting relevant United Nations programs and counterterrorism efforts in the Sahel. On the surface, that position reflected continued diplomatic engagement with regional security. Yet, viewed alongside developments on the ground, this situation appeared more complicated. By that stage, France had suspended military cooperations with Mali. Diplomatic relations had sharply deteriorated, with both countries expelling diplomats and significantly reducing bilateral cooperation. Yet, despite this breakdown, France continued an influential participant in Security Council discussions concerning the region. For many supporters, the Alliance of Sahel States, this created an apparent contradiction. The government had ended military partnership with France and established an alternative regional security framework. Yet, France continued playing a prominent role in shaping international discussions about the Sahel. Whether that reflects institutional continuity or an imbalance in global governance is precisely the issue many analysts continue debating. At this point, an important question deserves consideration. Many observers rightly point out the security situation inside the Alliance of Sahel States remained extremely challenging. Armed groups continued carrying out attacks and instability remained widespread. Those realities cannot be ignored. However, another question is equally important. Is the international response primarily designed to help these governments overcome their security challenges, or is it also intended to influence how these governments operate politically and diplomatically? The answer is unlikely to be simple. Security assistance, diplomacy, governance, and international oversight often overlap, making it difficult to separate one objective from the other. That complexity is exactly why this discussion deserves careful analysis rather than simplistic discussions. One of the clearest examples came in March 2023. Mali formally submitted a letter to the President of the United Nations Security Council, challenging France's continued role as penholder on issues relating to Mali. For a landlocked West African nation to formally question the authority of a permanent Security Council member was an extraordinary diplomatic step. Regardless of whether one agrees with Mali's position, the letter demonstrated just how profoundly relations between Bamako and Paris had changed, and how deeply questions about representation and influence had become embedded within the international debate over the future of the Sahel. Mali's central argument is straightforward. How can a country it has expelled for interfering in its internal affairs continue to write and draft resolutions that define international policies towards it. From Bamako's perspective, that contradiction raises a legitimate question about representation and authority in global decision making. There is an African proverb often used to capture these ideas. Until the lion tells its own story, the tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. That sentiment reflects a broader concern about who controls narratives in international institutions. It is also important to clarify that the penholder system itself has not collapsed. France's role has shifted in some areas, and responsibility for certain files, such as the UN offices for Western Africa and the Sahel, UNOWAS, has moved to arrangements involving countries like Sierra Leone and Denmark as co-penholders. However, the broader structure of permanent member influence within the Security Council remain largely intact. This creates an institutional tension that the Alliance of Sahel States continues to navigate. On one hand, the AES countries have established new political and military frameworks, redefined diplomatic alliances, and asserted greater sovereignty. On the other hand, they remain subject to decisions made within global institutions they cannot simply exit. The United Nations Security Council, in particular, continues to play a central role in shaping international responses. A complicating factor in this evolving landscape is the role of external partners. The AES did not only distance themselves from France, it also deepened security cooperations with Russia. The Wagner Group, now reorganized under the African Corps, is reported to have deployed approximately 1,500 personnel in Mali, with additional Russian military presence reported in Burkina Faso and Niger. Russia, unlike France, holds a permanent seat on the Security Council, and as a result, it can influence discussions and resolutions concerning the Sahel from within the same institution where Western states also operate. According to a July 2024 UN Security Council report, Russia's support for AES-aligned governments has complicated efforts to reach consensus on positions often supported by the ECOWAS and Western members. In practice, this dynamic has created a shifting balance of influence within the Council. Where France may advocate one interpretation of events, Russia may challenge or counter it. This has led to a situation in which the AES is often seen as operating within a broader context of external powers rather than in isolation. From one perspective, this could be interpreted as increased strategic autonomy for AES governments. Yet from another perspective, it raises questions about whether dependency has simply shifted from one external factor to another. There is no definitive answer, and even among analysts, interpretations vary. What is clear, however, is that the AES leadership is not acting without awareness of these dynamics. From their viewpoint, Russia's intervention in Mali beginning in 2021 contributed to stabilizing certain territories that had been contested for years, providing space for the state to regroup militarily. By contrast, Western-led interventions are often viewed by AES governments as having produced limited improvements in long-term security outcomes. These differing interpretations shape how each partnership is justified. At the same time, the AES narrative is grounded in broader structural grievances. For example, Niger was historically one of the largest suppliers of uranium to the European Union, accounting for more than 22% of EU supply. According to the Euratom Supply Agency, France itself generates approximately 70% of its electricity from nuclear energy, highlighting the strategic importance of the supply chain. These economic and resource relationships form part of the broader historical context that continues to influence political perceptions in the region. Across the AES countries, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, recent political and military transitions are widely seen by supporters as an attempt to fundamentally restructure governance and security systems. Supporters point to territorial gains, military reorganizations, and changes in foreign policies as evidence of meaningful transformation compared to previous administration. Yet at the same time, these developments remain highly contested and interpreted differently depending on political perspective. What is increasingly evident, however, is that both criticisms and support of the AES rest on legitimate but competing interpretation of complex realities. The AES leadership argues that international institutions have at times prioritized external strategic interests over local security priorities. Critics, meanwhile, question the long-term sustainability and independence of the current trajectory. The result is a deeply complex and evolving situation. Many citizens within the region express cautious support for the current military-led government, particularly in areas where symbolic or tactical military gains, such as the recapture of strategic locations, are seen as evidence of improved state capacity. For example, the recapture of Kidal in 2023 by Malian forces and their partners was widely described as a significant military symbolic development after years of stalled operations under previous governments. In Burkina Faso, similar perception of strengthened state authority have contributed to a level of public support that earlier elected governments struggled to achieve. These outcomes are politically significant regardless of how they are interpreted externally. Ultimately, the situation in the Sahel reflects overlapping realities, security challenges that remain unresolved, shifting international partnerships, contested narratives about sovereignty, and ongoing debates about the role of external actors in domestic conflicts. None of these dimensions exist in isolation, and together, they form a complex and evolving picture that continues to shape the future of the region. Beneath all of these political and institutional dynamics lies a far more complex and contested layer of interpretation. Some analysts and researchers argue that the conflict in the Sahel cannot be understood purely as an internal security crisis. Instead, they point to a broader set of regional and international influences that have shaped the evolution of violence in the area. There is an ongoing academic and policy debate about the extent to which external actors, whether states, transnational networks, or proxy forces, have influenced or exacerbated instability in parts of the Sahel. However, these claims remain highly contested and interpretations vary significantly depending on sources and methodology. The historical relationship between France and the broader Sahel region is deeply rooted in the colonial period and its aftermath. That legacy continues to influence political perception and diplomatic tensions today. Ethnic and regional divisions in countries such as Mali, including long-standing tensions between northern and southern communities, have also played a role in shaping internal political dynamics over time. These issues predate modern intervention and are part of a much longer historical context. There have been allegations and accusations made at various points, including claims presented by Malian authorities at international forums such as the United Nations Security Council. These claims have included assertion of external interference in domestic conflicts. However, such allegations are disputed and have not been universally substantiated by independent verification. At different times, media reports and testimony from various actors have also contributed to competing narratives about the nature of foreign involvement in the region. As with many conflict zones, information is often fragmented, politically sensitive, and difficult to independently confirm. Historical references are sometimes made in this context to earlier episodes in West African post-independence politics, where tensions between newly independent governments and former colonial powers were significant. These events continue to shape how current developments are interpreted by different observers. Within international relations, scholars often emphasize that asymmetries in power, such as permanent membership of the UN Security Council versus non-member status, inevitably influence how global decisions are framed and enforced. This structural imbalance is widely acknowledged in academic literature, even among critics of different geopolitical blocs. From this perspective, the central issue is not whether international institutions are used as instruments of influence, but how they are used and whose interests are most strongly reflected on their outcomes. In response, the Alliance of Sahel States has increasingly emphasized alternative institutional development, including proposal for financial independence mechanism and regional development structure such as the AES Development Bank. The effectiveness of these initiatives will depend largely on their ability to attract sustained investment and operational credibility from a diverse set of international partners. At the same time, continental and international organizations such as the African Union continue to play a role in articulating positions on security and governance challenges in the Sahel. Their statements often reflect the tension between advocating for African-led solutions and engaging with broader international security frameworks. The United Nations Security Council, like many global institutions, is widely analyzed in international relations scholarship as a space where major powers exert disproportionate influence over global security agendas. This is not unique to any single country, but reflects the structural design of the post-World War II international order. Within this context, the assertion by AES leaders that global institutions shape narratives about African security reflects a broader debate about representation, sovereignty, and decision-making power in international affairs. Ultimately, the Sahel has become a case study in how sovereignty is negotiated. In practice, under conditions of ongoing insecurity and competing geopolitical interests, it illustrates the tension between national autonomy, regional cooperation, and global governance structure, particularly when states are simultaneously dealing with internal conflict and external diplomatic pressure. The future trajectory of the region would likely depend on how effectively these overlapping pressures are managed and how different actors interpret the balance between security, sovereignty, and international engagement. Tell us what you think in the comment section below, and please do not forget to like, subscribe for more informative videos like this one. Thanks for watching.